Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in Song of the Broad Axe, and we are now going to look at sections 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. These 5 sections do form a really interesting unity, and so we're going to be looking at this celebration of what he'll call muscle and pluck forever. There is a shift that many readers will identify as moving from the material to, we might say, the metaphysical or the spiritual. We're going to have the great city debate, and in that regards, I really think that much of what Whitman is doing in this section is to respond to Plato's Republic. Of course, we've given a whole series of talks at learnstrong.net about Plato's Republic, and you can go back and review those comments. Speaking of learnstrong.net, the assumption is that you've been following our stuff down that left-hand side. The playlist is called Talks with Walt, and I hope that you've been with us from the very beginning in your own copy of Leaves of Grass. Several of you reporting that you'd never really read much of Leaves of Grass other than a few of those famous highlights, I Hear America Singing, or Song of Myself, maybe a few passages. And you came to one or two of these lectures and decided, you know what, maybe I will go back to the very beginning inscriptions and read all the way through. Now, we've worked everything from inscriptions, every word, every line of Leaves of Grass, all the way up to Broad Axe Part 3, that famous catalog section. And now we will turn to this section that we're going to qualify as the study of the ideal. Again, back to Plato's Republic, we might say. Now we're going to begin in passage 4. We're going to see this sections 4 through 8 as a unit of unity, some have called it, certainly celebrating the idea of Jeffersonian idealism. We're going to get to the whole idea of Emerson and Carlyle's the great man theory, as it was once referred to. I think there's a whole lot going on here that we want to celebrate and talk about. We begin with that very masculine phrase, muscle and pluck forever. Now, the idea of the masculinity or the strength variations of Leaves of Grass, we've been celebrating and talking about all the way through. Muscle and pluck forever. What invigorates life invigorates death. And we have to pause for a moment, shall we, and just enjoy these lines from Song of Myself, passage 6. He says, "What do you think's become of the young and old men? What do you think has become of the women and children who are obviously dead?" He says it this way: "They are alive and well somewhere." The smallest sprout in this passage, in this section, we're going to get to the seed. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses, and to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Now, go back to this opening lines of passage 4 of Song of the Broad Axe. "Muscle and pluck forever, what invigorates life invigorates death, and the dead advance as much as the living advance, and the future is no more uncertain than the present. For the roughness of the earth," we've seen this before, this idea of the roughness, the plainness, commonality of the earth, "and of man encloses as much as the delicacies of the earth and of man," this French rendering of delicacy, "and nothing endures but personal qualities." So it's going to be interesting that in part 4, section 4 of Song of the Broad Axe, there will be no mention of the axe. And then we'll find our way back to the axe. Remember, the axe being that symbol of both, as we've said in prior lectures, both symbol of weapon as well as tool. And here, we're not going to hear specifically about the axe, but maybe we might say the spirit of the axe, we might say. And then he asks 6 really interesting rhetorical questions. And we've heard this before. What do you think? Construction. What do you think endures? Do you think a great city endures? Now, 4 times we're going to get this, either a great city or great city, okay, in this section. Do you think a great city endures? By the way, this idea of the great city, what think you, I take my pen in hand, go back and look at it, how it's used there. Do you think a great city endures, or a teeming manufacturing state, or a prepared constitution, or the best built steamships, or hotels of granite and iron, or any chefs d'oeuvre of engineering, forts, armaments, he's going to begin with a very intriguing question. What makes the great city? Now, obviously, Whitman is the poet of the great city of Brooklyn and later New York. But we're going to ask now in Leaves of Grass, what is it that defines the ideal republic? We're back to one of the oldest questions in all of philosophy. We're back to Plato's Republic. And again, we've given full lectures on all of the books of Republic at learnstrong.net. You can go and find those on your own. Sounding very much like Open Road, though. Here we go. Away. These are not to be cherished for themselves, all the things he just listed. They fill their hour, the dancers dance, the musicians play for them, the show passes, all does well enough, of course. All does very well till one flash of defiance. Now, Emerson, we said this in earlier lectures, Emerson had called for an American poet and an American epic. And Whitman steps up to play the game. And I think that Whitman is definitely responding to Emerson's call to somehow transcend Europe. And I think what he's saying is, America will have cities that will transcend London, Paris, the two great cities, of course, of Whitman's known day. In other words, there's something beyond, and here's what fundamentally makes America America. As we've said it so many times, it's that Promethean element. Don't tell me what to do. No. You don't tell me, I tell you. Fundamental for Whitman, that's what it means to be American. Here he uses the word defiance. We'll come back to this defiant deed in section 6 in a bit. A great city, and then he'll finally say it, is that which has the greatest men and women. If it be a few ragged huts, it is still the greatest city in the whole world. Now, of course, you're smiling because you think of immediately of Thoreau and Walden, and we've given full lectures on every section of Walden as well, where he celebrates something quite similar. The idea that in the end, that the individual is far more important than the group. But when you get a group of individuals together, now you have something really important. And for Whitman, that will be America. This is his ultimate goal. His ultimate goal is to celebrate the unity and diversity. Right, and the diversity in unity. Now to passage 5. Again, I don't think these sections really necessarily deserve a break, so we'll just keep going. The place where a great city stands, and we're back to this idea of the great city, is not the place of stretched wharves, docks, manufacturers, deposits of produce merely. Size, in other words, is not the key component. And then we're going to go with 5 of these nors. The great city is not, or nor, the place of ceaseless salutes of newcomers, or the anchor lifters of the departing, nor the place of the tallest and costliest buildings. Think about the Tower Building of 1889 is the first, what many architects call the first true skyscraper, 11-story structure for the first time. But he says, none of these, or shops selling goods from the rest of the earth. We think about Suleiman as well as passage to India. America very quickly is about to become the place where so many different kind of imports and exports will start to happen. He says that doesn't make a great city, nor the place of the best libraries already. Carnegie was beginning to take care of the idea of the development of the library, starting, as we've said in earlier lectures, from Benjamin Franklin, who was one of the very first to come up with the idea of the great libraries and schools and creeds and abeyance, you'll remember from our passage 1 of Song of Myself, nor the place where money is plenteous. In other words, it's not just going to be there. America's not going to just be great because it's the top economic market in the world for Whitman, nor the place of the most numerous population. Just because we have high density of people does not make it the great city. And then we're going to get 19 wheres. All right, and we're going to get this idea of standing. So you're going to get a powerful imagery of standing. Where the city stands, where the brawniest breed of orators and bards, we obviously think of Sandburg's Chicago, borrowing heavily from this. Where the city stands that is beloved by these and loves them in return and understands them. For Whitman, this is the key of the greatest poet. The great poet doesn't just celebrate the American city, understands the American city. Where no monuments exist to heroes, but in the common words and deeds. Now, this idea of common obviously takes us back to Leaves of Grass and Song of Myself, passage 6. The idea of deeds, do you remember in A Song of the Open Road, passage 4, heroic deeds, he says, are all done in the open air. Where thrift is in its place, and prudence as in its place. Now this use of the word prudence, our Nortons will tell us, we gotta be looking for songs of prudence later, and the note that will be a part of that when we talk about it. Whitman will view prudence as not merely a pragmatic virtue, now I'm reading Norton's, but intrinsic and inseparable in every virtuous thought or deed, recalling its original association with providence. Prudence will be, can we say this out loud? Prudence will be almost the subsuming of the four cardinal virtues of Republic and Plato. You'll remember them as wisdom, courage, temperance, and what's the last one? Justice. That would probably be our best rendering of prudence here. In other words, the ideal city, the ideal republic for Whitman is a place of justice, prudence. He continues, where the men and women think lightly of the laws. Now, immediately we're thinking about Thoreau and his civil disobedience, that government is best which governs not at all, certainly governs least, he will say before that. And then Whitman, the abolitionist, in one of his most powerful statements of abolitionism, says, where the slave ceases and the master of slaves ceases. Whitman wanted slavery to be removed from the American fabric. He understood that the only way it probably would happen would be martial contest. Where the populace rise at once against the never-ending audacity of elected persons, Whitman perceived America as a place where citizens are defiant to their government and yet celebrate their government. What an interesting conundrum that Whitman will pose for us. Where fierce, you'll remember this use of the word in I Sing the Body Electric, where fierce men and women, by the way, did you notice he continues to be very inclusive in his language? It's always men and women. Pour forth, and then he got this interesting simile, where fierce men and women pour forth as the sea to the whistle of death pours its sweeping and unripped waves. In other words, you can't stop it. America, you cannot stop it. This is going to be one of Whitman's ideas of progress, where outside authority enters always after the precedence of inside authority. Well, there it is. And that is the argument of, as we've said in earlier lectures, Plato's Republic. That a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and again, that Lincoln-esque language of Gettysburg Address comes to mind here, is always going to be governed first and foremost by an interior moral ethic that will then be manifested in an external moral ethic. And this is foundational, really, in our 5 Ps of Whitman, one of those being the political Whitman. This is his understanding of democracy, where the citizen, key word to understand that he's talking directly with Plato's Republic here, is always the head, and then he uses the word, and ideal. And of course, several of you are smiling because you know that we are talking in Plato's Republic of an ideal republic, and so he'll use it. And president, mayor, by the way, notice all these are capitalized, governor, and whatnot, very American phrase, whatnot, are agents for pay. In other words, we pay the president. We vote him into office, we pay him. And to that degree, he or she will respond to the citizens' needs, wants, desires. And it's always been this way for Whitman, and it is the heart of what makes the ideal republic. Where, and now he's going to start talking about children, and here immediately we get to education, here immediately we get to Song of the Open Road, passage 6, or Song of Myself, passage 47. You'll remember, he says, he most honors myself, learns under it to destroy the teacher. And this idea of destroying the teacher, what a radical idea in the pedagogy, and we talked about that in our lecture of Song of Myself, passage 46, 47, where children are taught to be laws to themselves and to depend on themselves. Now, the fact that he uses this phrase, laws to themselves, is going to be not only a biblical reference, but also a Platonic reference. It's an Emersonian reference. What's he saying? Creeds and schools and abeyance. You'll maybe remember in Song of Myself, just to go back for just a second, do you remember this? In Song of Myself, when, Song of the Open Road, just because we can do it, let's just remind ourselves, Song of the Open Road, passage 6. Do you remember this? Here a great personal deed has room. Such a deed seizes upon the hearts of the whole race of men. Its effusion of strength and will overwhelms law and mocks all authority and all argument against it. Here is the test of wisdom. Wisdom is not finally tested in schools. Wisdom can't be passed from one having it to another not having it. Wisdom is of the soul. It's not susceptible of proof. Is its own proof. Applies to all stages and objects and qualities. And is content. It is wisdom, the certainty of the reality and immortality of things and the excellence of things. Something there is in the flow to the side of things that provokes it out of the soul. Very much echoing here this same idea. No question, there is this idea that educationally children are, and can we say this? This is why we teach Leaves of Grass to not just American children, but to all children of the world. Why? Because what would it be like to live in a world where children are taught to be laws to themselves and to depend on themselves? This self-reliance, obviously, of Emersonian ideas, self-reliance, is so huge. Where, and then from being independent, look at the next line, where ecumenity is illustrated in affairs. In other words, there's harmony, there's balance. In other words, I think and I do what I must do, and you think and you must do what you must do. However, for us to have a society, we must somehow come together and be united. How can we do that? Where speculations on the soul are encouraged. Now, again, I think this whole passage is a tribute to Plato, and clearly we're thinking here Plato's Phaedo, which we've given a full lecture on at learnstrong.net. Remember the irony of that. There, the cup with the hemlock in it. There, all of the disciples, friends, pals, students, if you want to use that term, of Socrates are there. They're all sad. Socrates is excited. It's about time to leave. It's exciting. It's exciting. Well, aren't you worried? No, why would I be worried? I'm going on a great journey. Because the soul is about to leave the body. Soul, what are you talking about? Soul. The Phaedo, of course, of Plato, one of those great statements of the soul, where speculations on the soul are encouraged. We ought to embrace this idea, of course, in our education of our children, to talk about not just the physical but the metaphysical. Where women walk in public processions in the streets, the same as the men. Where they enter the public assembly and take places, the same as the men. So here we have Whitman. Not only earlier we saw Whitman as emancipator of slaves, but now as well emancipator of women. Where the city of the faithfulest friends stands. You'll remember his use of the words friends in These I Singing in Spring. Where the city of the cleanliness of the sexes stands. Go back to Song of the Open Road, passage 10. No taint, you'll remember, he says. Where the city of the healthiest fathers stands. Where the city of the best-bodied mothers stands. Notice again this repetition of the word stands. There, the great city stands. And the idea that the ideal republic is a unity of citizens who are laws unto themselves. Can we say this out loud? This is clearly a radical departure from what Plato imagined in his Republic. And yet some of you would maybe argue that a more generous reading of Plato's Republic suggests that if you have young people who have been taken out of the darkness of the cave, remember our Plato Republic 7, the cave allegory, and have been educated correctly, they will be laws unto themselves. They will understand how to live those four cardinal virtues assumed in this word prudence. From here, we just kind of continue with this line of thought into passage 6. How beggarly appear arguments before a defiant deed. Creeds and schools in abeyance is the way he said it. You'll remember Song of Myself, passage 1. How the floridness, and I love the way that Whitman will use words one and only one time in Leaves of Grass. We're about to get two words he only uses one time in Leaves of Grass, all of Leaves of Grass. How the floridness of the materials of cities shrivels before a man's or woman's look. By the way, floridness and shrivels, both of them only used one time in all Leaves of Grass. Isn't that cool to find these kinds of hidden little gems? Floridness of the materials of cities shrivels before a man's or woman's look. Now, this idea of look, I mean, it's one of the most popular words in all of Leaves of Grass. There's just, go back to Song of Myself, passage 48, for example, to talk about looking in the face of men and women is to see the face of God. I mean, there's just so many references to look. And notice the exclamation mark to begin passage 6. In other words, a defiant deed and a defiant look by a man or a woman is fundamentally what it means to be an American. No doubt about it. all waits or goes by default till a strong being appears. Now, Emerson, influenced by Carlyle with the great man theory, and of course we've talked about this when we did all of the lectures over the different essays of Emerson. But notice here it isn't strong man or strong woman, it's strong being. We're back to our big five and the question of ontology. Who are you? Notice this idea of being takes us now from the physical to, obviously, the metaphysical. A strong being, he uses the phrase again. A strong being is the proof, again we're back to the arguments line just a few lines above, proof of the race and of the ability of the universe. When he or she, notice it's he or she, appears, materials are overawed. That is to say, we're actually arguing that the physical world, the material world, will bow to the metaphysical world when he or she appears as a strong being. What an amazing idea. The dispute on the soul stops. Now the idea of this, you can have the fight, you can have the debate about whether there is a soul or not. Obviously he's channeling Plato's Phaedo. But at the moment he says that we identify this powerful, strong being, this man or woman who lives as a law unto himself or self themselves, all of a sudden, to finish, the old customs and phrases are confronted, turned back, or laid away. Go back to our reading of Song of the Open Road, passage 6, as we did it just a few moments ago. Then we're going to get 4 interesting rhetorical questions. What is your money making now? What can it do now? Obviously, we ask the question, who are these questions for? I would argue they are to all the great cities of known Europe of the day, especially London and Paris. What is your respectability now? What are your theology, tuition, society, traditions, statute books now? In other words, history. And then, to borrow directly